This is Francis Westbrook, a staff member, and this is a Veterans History interview with Frank White. Mr. White, please give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth.
Frank Havelock White, born November 13, 1920, in Ridgewood, New Jersey.
Mr. White, when did you come to Atlanta?
We came to Atlanta in 1949. I was the housewares buyer at Davison Paxson Company in Atlanta, and then we went back to New Jersey with the Macy Corporation, and I worked at L. Bamberger and Company in Newark, New Jersey. Then I worked with another corporation for 23 years, and in 1975 we moved back to Atlanta when I retired, and have been here ever since.
And you were in the Navy. When did you enlist in the Navy?
I enlisted in the Navy right after Pearl Harbor. I signed up for the V7 program, which was an officer training program for college graduates. And I went to South Bend, Indiana for a month at apprentice seaman training, and then 3 months at Northwestern in Chicago Midshipman School, graduating in December 1942 with the rank of ensign in the U.S. Navy.
And what were you doing before you enlisted?
I was in college. I graduated from Dartmouth College in 1942, Hanover, New Hampshire.
So you were able to graduate before?
They moved the graduation up a bit, and they allowed us to graduate early. So I got out in May of 42, and I didn't get called into the Naval program until September of 42.
You were fortunate to be able to get the college completed before.
Yes. And I just spent the whole summer waiting to be called while everybody else was out fighting the war.
I see. Was it Pearl Harbor that actually made you make the decision to go ahead and enlist?
Yes. I had no thoughts of entering the service at all prior to that time.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
A classmate and I were on our way back from a weekend at Bennington College in Vermont, and we were driving along in my car with the top down, having a wonderful time on that Sunday on our way back to college when we heard on the radio of the attack at Pearl Harbor. From that point on, it completely changed our lives.
So you enlisted just very shortly after that?
Yes, my father called me and said, you get down to Boston to the Naval headquarters and sign up or you'll be drafted. So I found out that I had to go to the Naval District where I was a resident, which is New Jersey, and I went to New York and signed up for the V7 program.
I see. Could you tell me, please, a little bit more about the V7 program?
The V7 was you were called a 90-day wonder because the training was 90 days after 1 month apprentice seaman training, and it was an intensified program of navigation, ordnance or gunnery, and just shipboard operations. And you were a midshipman and what we called a 90-day wonder, because you got in 90 days what people at Annapolis got in 4 years. So we had quite an intensified training program, but it was all college graduates and some of the nicest guys I've ever associated with in that program. We had a good time in Chicago, because Chicago was one of the best cities in the United States for servicemen, and they really took care of us.
That's
Yes. Tower Hole is where our resident was, which was right near the Northwestern Gymnasium, sort of across the street.
I see. So you had the V7 program.
Right.
And then what was next?
After graduation, which was the end of December of '42, I was assigned to a training program at Norfolk, Virginia, at the Naval Base, in preparation for assignment to the fleet. And I went down there with 2 other whites, because we were all put together in the midshipman program by alphabetical last name. So Joe White and Homer White and Frank White all went to Norfolk for training, and we were going to be there for about a month, going through detailed gunnery and fire control and different types of programs. But through an error in the offices there, they shot us out in about 2 weeks to a training program in Key West, Florida. It's a sound school for anti-submarine warfare. So we went down there and spent a month there under the anti-submarine program. Then I was assigned to the Mulaney from there in, I believe it was April of '42. No, it was April '43 that I went aboard the Mulaney.
Would you like to, were you with the Mulaney for all of your?
From the beginning, it was a brand new ship being built in San Francisco. I was a member of what they call a plank owner of the ship, which is a person who was on the ship when it is built and commissioned. And I was a plank owner. I stayed on the ship from that day forward until 1946, when I was separated from the service. So I spent the whole war on one ship, never got off.
Remarkable. I imagine that's an ideal situation because you learn so much about the ship.
Well, it is, but in a way, I wanted to get off and get back to the United States and get new construction on one of the newer destroyers, but I never could get off because the Naval Department thought they needed to leave some of the seasoned officers on board the ship when they took off the officers that weren't doing so well. So your reward for being a good officer was you got to stay on the ship forever.
And you obviously took very good care of this ship.
So we never did get off.
A lot of good service. So you're now on the Mulaney.
Right.
And take it from where you began and what your rank was when you began and the
Well, I was an ensign when I reported for duty on the Mulaney, and when I finished my naval career on the ship, I was a full lieutenant, 2-striper, and I was promoted to lieutenant commander in the reserve shortly after the war.
Would you like to take us through then some of your experiences?
Well, okay, we started out from San Francisco after our shakedown cruise, in which we went out and tried out all the guns and torpedo tubes and depth charges and made sure everything on the ship worked when the ship was officially accepted by the Navy and commissioned. And we were ordered to the Aleutian Islands off Alaska, which was our first duty. And believe me, that really separated the sheep from the goats, because the Aleutian Islands are some of the worst weather you can imagine. The ocean is black in color, it's very rough, and they have what they call the willowaws up there, which are winds that come up very quickly. And we went up there for the ADAC operation, and it was the Kiska operation. And when they landed at Kiska, the Japanese had already left. So it was really, you'll note in our battle stars, we didn't get anything for Kiska. Nothing happened there. But the weather was so bad. In ADAC, one of the islands, there was an officers club, and we could go ashore and have cocktails and beer and stuff, which you couldn't have on the ship. Play touch football or baseball on the muddy ground, the tundra. But at night, the willowaws would come up, and the ship would start to drag its anchor, and we had to either cut the anchors loose or bring them on board and go out and steam around in a circle all night long, because otherwise we'd be washed right up on the beach. But fortunately, we got orders to leave there and head for the Southwest Pacific via Pearl Harbor. So we set course 180 right straight south to Pearl Harbor. And I'll never forget leaving the black, miserable, cold water of the Aleutian Islands and gradually getting into that aquamarine, light blue-green water around the Hawaiian Islands and hearing the radio broadcast with the steel guitars and everything going on. And then over the horizon finally came the pink and white hotels that lined Waikiki Beach, and we steamed into Fort Harbor and stayed there for a short while and gave the crew some time ashore. And then I was detached at that point to attend a fighter director school in Pearl Harbor.
So you attended the school in Pearl Harbor?
And the ship went without me to the Southwest Pacific. I stayed there about 6 weeks, I believe, and then flew from there to New Guinea to rejoin the ship.
And what was your duty on the ship at that time?
At the time I left Pearl Harbor, I was assigned as the radar officer and fighter director officer, which means that you were assigned airplanes and you direct them from your radar to shoot down other airplanes that are coming in against the formation, or direct them to go anywhere, but you have control over airplanes that are assigned to your ship. So you're the fighter director officer to control the airplanes.
I see. And how long did you do that?
Well, I did that for the entire time I was on the ship until Okinawa, when everything changed. But we went from Cape Gloucester in New Guinea with MacArthur's 7th Fleet, which was a fleet composed of 2 heavy Australian cruisers and 4 Australian destroyers, and our light cruisers and destroyers in our task group. We were MacArthur's Navy, and we went with all of his landings from New Guinea all the way across New Guinea to the Philippines, and then from the Philippines we went up to Iwo Jima. We were there for that landing. Then from Iwo Jima we went to Okinawa, and that's where we were hit by a suicide bomber, which put us out of the war.
Now, we're starting the tape, so you had a lot of experience of knowing General MacArthur.
Well, not personally, because he was on land and we were on the sea, but we were under his direction to a certain degree, since he was in charge of the whole area. But we got to know some of his officers, because I remember one time in particular we were asked to take, I believe with General Kruger, from Cape Gloucester to Halmahera, where MacArthur's headquarters were on New Guinea. And when we went in to pick him up, we had no charts for that area, so we didn't dare go in too close to shore. So he had to ride out in a small LCVP boat up and down like that. When he got on the ship, he was really upset that we hadn't come in real close for him. But we said we just couldn't take a chance on running aground. And his major aide was assigned to the wardroom. The general went up to the bridge to the captain's cabin, and the major came in just about the time we were having dinner, which meant that the wardroom had the white tablecloth out with all the china and the silverware, and the mess attendants with the white jackets. They were serving the food and taking food, and this is the way we ate all the time. And this major who had just come from a foxhole in New Guinea couldn't believe what he was seeing, and we said, look, you had the choice. You could have joined the Navy. You joined the Marines or the Army. You get what you chose. And so he said, can I push this buzzer? He wanted to push the buzzer that signaled one of the attendants to come in and see what we wanted. But we had a lot of fun with him. But we did all these leapfrog operations with MacArthur's forces, and I must say MacArthur was a real genius. He was able to bypass pockets of Japanese strength and put us in and cut off their supplies, and he really did a wonderful job getting us across to the Philippines. And most of these operations involved landing Army and Marine personnel from attack transports at the various beachheads. But I'll never forget the Philippine operation, because that was a major operation. All these other things that we were doing were just little operations, but the Philippines was a big operation, and the full strength of the Navy, for the most part, was there. And we really enjoyed, well, I won't say enjoyed, but it was interesting to see the other half, or the other parts of the Navy, the big carriers and all the transports, and just the thousands of ships that were there for that landing, which went off very well. And we, of course, as you know, the Japanese did come in through the Surigao Straits and around the northern part, and there were some naval battles there and battles with carriers, but we never got to shoot a shot at any of the Japanese because they just weren't at the beachhead where we were. We did a lot of bombarding before the troops went in, but once they were on the ground, we couldn't fire anymore because the possibility of hitting them. But the Philippines went very well, and then we were assigned next to the Iwo Jima. We went right up there and did a lot of bombardment, and were there for the landing. And that was really the time of the war that I really felt horrible for what could happen to people, because the casualties were so high, and we were right off the beach, and we could look with binoculars and long telescopes right at the men going up the beach, and I never wanted to see people killed, but they were just under crossfire from mortars, and it was a terrible thing. But finally the beachheads were secured, and we were sent out of the area to escort the attack transports away from that area. And from there we went in on the Okinawa operation, and that proved to be our downfall, because one day we did not have any planes assigned to us, and we were patrolling up and down the coast of Okinawa, just being there to be called for fire support if needed. And minesweepers were sweeping close to shore, and we were maybe a mile or two offshore. And one of my college, wasn't a fraternity brother, but one of my best friends at college was captain of one of the minesweepers, and we talked back and forth on signal flags and blinker, and had quite an interesting conversation, because our ships would cross like this every now and then. Well, 6 kamikaze, 4 or 6, I forget which it was. Anyway, 4 kamikazes came in and attacked our ship, and we shot 2 of them down and damaged another one, but one of them got through, and it crashed right into our ship. I was in the radar shack, which is in the main superstructure of the ship, and I had no planes to work with, and when the radar saw these planes coming in, and they came in off the land, of course we couldn't pick them up over the land because we got too much of a land return, but about the time the plane came in, I went out on deck because I figured I want to see what's happening. Well, I didn't see the plane hit the ship, But it was, to give you an example of what it was like, if you're in a rowboat, say at a dock, and sitting up in the bow of the ship, and somebody jumps onto the back seat, the boat goes like that, the same effect on our ship. I felt this tremendous bounce on the ship, and then a big explosion, and fire and smoke and everything. Well, the plane had a bomb on board, and it started some fires among our ammunition handling rooms and different on-deck ammunition. And the fuel oil started burning, and it got out of control, so our commanding officer ordered the ship abandoned because we were afraid that the magazines where all the ammunition that you carry is stored, if they blew, the whole ship would have gone up in pieces. So we were ordered to abandon the ship, and I jumped over the side. I'd been given a Mae West life jacket by a friend of mine in the Air Force, and so I pulled the strings and the thing had floated. I went paddling over, and my friend and his minesweeper were right there, and I swam towards them, and there was another destroyer that came in to pick up survivors, and they had a bullhorn. They were calling me to swim towards them, and they said, this person must be delirious. He's swimming away from us. Well, I wasn't delirious. I knew that they were assigned to go up to Radar Picket Station 2, where our ships are being sunk right and left. So I thought, I don't want to be sunk twice in one day. So I kept swimming till my college friend pulled me out of the water on his minesweeper. And all I could think of was, oh boy, back to the United States, new construction, my dreams are realized. Well, make a long story short, our ship did not explode, and this destroyer went alongside, put the fires out, and our captain went around in the whaleboat to the various ships nearby and picked up all the crew that were left that had survived. So I had to go back to the ship, which we managed to get underway on one engine and got it into Camaretto, which is what they call Busted Ship Bay, B-U-S-T-E-D, Busted Ship Bay, because all of the ships that were survivors of kamikaze attacks were anchored in there awaiting repairs or salvage or whatever. So we went in there, and they put temporary repairs into effect for our ship, because our ship was disemboweled amidships, and they had to took railroad rails and laid them up and down the decks, welded them to the remaining deck, so the ship on the way back to the States wouldn't buckle in two. And we left Camaretto, I don't know, we were there about 6 weeks, and went back to San Francisco via Pearl Harbor, where they were ready to put the ship back together again. But we all got survivors leave and left the ship and went home.
So how long did the repairs require?
They took about 90 days, as I recall. But we went back to where we were built. So they already had a new deck house sitting on the dock. They made some advanced preparations so that they were ready to put the ship back out as quickly as they possibly could, which they did an excellent job of rebuilding it and bringing it up to date, all the latest equipment and different things that they needed, modification. So we left from there and went to San Diego on another shakedown cruise, and when we were on our way out of San Diego to Pearl Harbor to join the fleet, the atom bomb dropped and the war ended, and they turned us around and said, don't go to Pearl Harbor, go through the Panama Canal up to Charleston, up the Wando River, and into mothballs. So we took the ship up there. By that time, I was the navigator on the ship, so I had the fun of navigating through the Panama Canal and up through the Windward Passage, the Bahamas, and up through that way into Charleston and up the Wando River, and that's where we ended the Mulaney's war career. And since then, it was taken out during the Korean War, and but I believe now, well, it's true. The ship was sold to the Taiwan Navy. They bought it for an undisclosed sum, and since then it's been scrapped. So the ship is completely gone. But we have in our possession, the officers who run the ship's wheel and the annunciators, which we were able to get out of the wrecking yard over in, I guess it was in Taiwan. But we have those in our possession.
That's
Now, because we have an annual reunion of the ship.
That's remarkable.
We get together.
When will the next reunion be?
It's going to be I think it's going to be in Boston or somewhere in New England, probably in September or October. The last one was in San Diego. We go to different places around the country each year.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
How many people come to those?
About six or eight of the officers, and maybe 30 or 40 of the crew. But see, we include the Korean cruises as well as World War II. So we really have two groups of officers and men that are there. There are more of the Koreans because they were younger than the ones who went through the World War II. The World War II guys are dying off. We just don't have that many left. But we do get together. Yeah.
Where is this wheel? Where is the ship's wheel?
It's up in Illinois. One of the fellows who sort of is actually he's the son of our communications officer who died of cancer right after the war, and he put the reunions together in memory of his father, and he sort of runs the whole show. So he made the arrangements. In fact, he was trying to get the ship away from the Taiwan people rather than scrapping it, have it brought over and put in some place, gosh knows where, as like some of the other World War II ships are now in various places around the United States. But we could never come up with the funds to do that. But he was really determined to save the ship. But he did get these various artifacts off of the ship before they cut it up and destroyed it.
Yes, that's wonderful. You mentioned the Panama Canal. Do you want to tell a little bit about navigating?
Well, actually, there isn't very much to navigating because they put a pilot on board. But being navigator of the ship, you're responsible to the commanding officer for the safety of the ship. And if you think the pilot's running you aground or doing anything, you tell the captain we're in trouble. And at one point, coming into the canal, there are two ranges on the shore. A range is two different vertical objects that are up in the air, and you have to get them lined up. In other words, if you're off, they're not lined up, that means you're not on that line that comes out from that range. So our captain wanted to steer a different course, and I said, no, you can't do that because you'll be off the range. And if we're off the range, we'll have to run aground. And so he agreed with the pilot and me that we should stay on the range. But it's interesting going through the canal because when you take a ship that has been in salt water all its life and you get into the lakes in between the two ends of the canal, you flush out all of your tanks, you fill up your empty tanks with fresh water and just rinse them out to get all the salt and everything else out of the tanks, and then you're nice and clean and fresh when you get to the other, and you fill them up again with fuel oil. But I found it an interesting experience, particularly going through the locks. I'd never been through there, but I enjoyed it immensely, just being a spectator on hand.
Yes. Let's see, looking at the biography you brought, is there anything here you'd like to specifically talk about? The 7 battle stars, that's amazing.
Yeah, this covers pretty well, starting with Cape Gloucester in New Britain, then eastern New Guinea, the Sidor occupation, Hollandia, Wake, Totem, not Wake Island, but Totem, Wake, Samari in operation, Biak Island operation, Cape Sansabor, Morotai Islands, and then the Philippines Leyte and Iwo Jima, February 45, and Okinawa, April 45. It was April 6th that we were hit by a kamikaze, and each of those 7 operations earned us a battle star. Just a word or two about the destroyer. It's 376 feet long, has a beam of 39 feet, and it's has a crew of between 273 and 334, depending on what your configuration is. It has 5 5-inch 38 main battery, 5 40 millimeter, and 7 20 millimeter, 2 torpedo tubes, depth charges. Maximum speed is 38 knots, which is about 44 miles per hour, and it's 2,100 tons. And when you consider that you get 2,100 tons of steel going through the water at 44 miles per hour, that's pretty doggone fast. But we don't run that way very often, because if you did, you'd burn up all your fuel in about 2 days. So we usually cruise at about 15 knots. Our casualties on April 6/45, we had 21 dead, 9 missing, and quite a number of wounded, which aren't listed here. But that was a bad day for the Navy, because they during April to June 45, there were 30 ships sunk, 368 ships damaged, and 5,000 dead, 4,800 wounded, which for the Navy quite often doesn't have high casualties unless the kamikazes, because we never excuse me, we never got into surface battles with the Navy because the submarines had sunk them all, and the aircraft carrier fleets had wiped all airships off the face of the ocean. So we had no chance. We had one time in New Guinea when some Japanese destroyers came into our area, and we chased them out. But there again, we were running it. They were faster than we were, because their ships were very maneuverable. And they were heading out, and we were after them at full speed. And we realized, if we keep chasing these people, we're going to run out of fuel, and then they'll turn around and sink us. So we had to call off the chase before we caught them. But they fled. They didn't want any part of the surface engagement with us at night.
Definitely. Now, you have brought your scrapbook and a Reader's Digest magazine. Would this be a good time to show us
Sure.
those? Great. Thank you. Now you can show us that, and please tell me about the Reader's Digest article.
Okay. In September of 1989, you better stop what I need to. In September of 1989, the Reader's Digest had a feature condensation about our ship, which was entitled The Ship That Outsailed Time. And it was quite an interesting little book review, which detailed the history of our ship, and in particular the kamikaze attacks. I must say that they did an excellent job, because our gunnery officer, Hap Perry, collaborated with them and made sure that they stayed on track, because lots of times publications will editorialize and maybe not get all the facts straight, but this little book is a wonderful book that covers the entire history of the millennia, particularly the kamikaze part of it.
Excellent. And would you spell the name of the ship at this point?
Yes, it's Mullany. DD 528. DD for destroyer, and the number 528 was the number of our ship.
That magazine looks excellent. We look forward to reading that. I'm glad to have that as part of the official records here too. Is this a good time to tell us about your scrapbook?
Yeah.
Some of the highlights.
After the war, I inherited a lot of pictures of our ship being finally, my final position on the ship was executive officer, which is the number 2 officer on the ship. In other words, I started at the least officer on the ship, at the George as they call it, or the ensign, all the way up through to the executive officer. We had a ship's photographer who was the doctor, and he took pictures during when there was no casualties to minister to or nothing else to do. He would take photographs of what was going on, and he at the end of the war we had all these films undeveloped, didn't know what to do with them, so I sent them to Eastman Kodak and got all these pictures back, and from those pictures I put together a scrapbook which details pretty well a lot of the things that we did, primarily what I did as an officer and what the ship did in various operations. And there's one picture. Should I take this out of here?
No, I think if you just leave it in there.
Okay. This picture here is a picture that was taken from one of the carriers, one of the few times that we worked with the fast carriers, and it's a good shot of our ship underway. And I think it's the USS Tennessee in the background. We didn't work too often with the fast carriers. We were always assigned to landing operations down in New Guinea. I've got this picture here. I think is particularly interesting. This one over here, because it shows the ship underway with the various enlisted men out on deck, sunbathing and enjoying their time off of their duty stations. The Pacific was wonderful weather to be in. We never had a bad storm, typhoon, or anything like that. It was just beautiful blue skies, wonderful water. This picture here, I don't know if you can pick this one up in the corner. It's Carol Landis, the movie actress, and this was taken in the Hotel Australia in Sydney, Australia. When we were in New Guinea, we were allowed what they called an R&R cruise every so often. We go down to Australia for 2 weeks and go ashore and have a big time. Well, Bob Hope's group with Carol Landis was in Australia at the time. I had met her in California when I was in college, so I sent word up to her suite that I was here, and she said, "Come on up." So I went up, and the press was there, and they took, somebody from home, let's get a picture and all this business. So I went to the newspaper and got a glossy of the picture. Some of these pictures are of other ships that I've put in here, but to give you an idea of some of the fun that we had, this picture is taken in the atoll Ulithi, which is a major staging area for the fast carrier forces during the war. We happened to get in there. I don't recall exactly why we were there, but we were allowed to take beer, which we had on the ship. Couldn't drink it on board ship, but we could take it ashore and drink it. So we took a party of the crew, and this is a group of the officers that were there, and believe me, we drank Australian beer, which is a lot more alcoholic than our beer, and we had a great time over there. Some of these pictures are rather small, so I don't know whether they would come through or not, but
Well, perhaps you could show us the V-main
Okay, where? I think that's back here.
Actually, we can make copies of some of these pages, so we don't need to worry too much about seeing every one. But it's a fabulous record of the ship.
These are not really sequenced properly. I wonder what happened to that V-mail.
Would you show us the cap, that ribbon?
Oh, this. Commission pennant. Every naval ship has a commission pennant when they're in commission. It flies from the top of the foremast, and this was the commission pennant that went into the Philippine invasion. We had to change commission pennants because they get worn out, and I asked the quartermaster to let me have the one that went into the Philippines, and he gave it to me, which I've put in here for posterity. We corresponded at home with what was called V-mail, and it was, I don't think you're going to be able to see this, but that is a V-mail letter that I wrote to my family, and they were pretty prompt in getting the message to your family.
Very nice. We'll make a copy of that if it's all right, so we can
Sure.
actually read it.
Right. Would you like to see some of the pictures of the damage to the ship?
Very much. That would be very interesting.
Okay. We took a lot of pictures of the ship after it was hit, and it's very hard to, some of them are not too good because they have faded, but this picture here shows one of the directors of the 40 millimeter battery on the ship, which was in the after part of the ship. And I had a very good friend, an enlisted man, who was operating this director, and the plane practically hit him head on. I mean, he must have looked up his aiming sight right down the nose of the plane as it came in. And we just had a lot of damage to the ship. It was just metal. That probably won't come out too well, but it was a terrible disaster for the central part of the ship. But luckily we were able to put it back together again. This is another picture here. It probably won't come out too well, but give you an idea of some of the extensive damage. See, not only the damage caused by the plane and the bombs, but we had depth charges which were cast TNT on deck and in racks, and then they started exploding when the fire got to them, so that was just like having additional bombs dropped on you, to have several hundred pounds of TNT go off right on the deck. But fortunately it didn't cause the ship to sink. I went ashore in Okinawa, and in civilian clothes. They wouldn't let us go ashore in uniform because they're afraid we might be captured or shot. And it was interesting to see the cemetery there and see some of the local people in the Karamareta area, which was not a combatant area. This is just an official document that might say authenticated the fact that I was a lieutenant in the Naval Reserve. I don't know whether they sent these out to everybody, but I got one and I put it in my file.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. He took a lot of. I had many pictures, some which I couldn't use, and some which I didn't use. But he just was there with a camera taking pictures every time we went to general quarters.
Excellent. So then you came out of service then in, did you say 46?
Yes,
And then what was next for you after that?
marriage.
Wonderful. Someone you had met before the war?
No, no. As a matter of fact, when I came home after the war, I said to my mother, I said, you know, all my contemporaries are married. They got married before, during, or immediately after the war. I was single in the war, so I didn't get out real early. Couldn't get enough points, and by the time I got home, they're all gone. And my mother said, well, I know of two girls that are still around, and you might want to look them up. One of them was a sister of some of my college friends, and the other one I never heard of, but she was a widow from an Army fellow who was killed at Anzio. So I looked up the one that I knew through college connections first. That didn't click. But then when I looked up my present wife, it did. So we were married. We were met in June, engaged in July, and married in September of the year I got out. So we've been together ever since.
That's wonderful. And where was she from? New Jersey then?
She was from New Jersey, from my hometown. Our families knew each other.
I see.
So it was a nice lineup.
And then you were already out of college, so your education
I had completed my education, and I made a mistake, I think, in not going back to business school. But I don't know, I just decided I wanted to, go to work and start building a family and everything else that I'd been deprived of for 4 years while I was in the military.
Yes.
So I went to work for the Macy Corporation, R.H. Macy in New York, on their training squad, and then worked in the housewares department there for, I guess, a couple of years, and then was assigned the housewares department at Davison's in Atlanta. So we moved to Atlanta in '49, and then I moved back in '50 to Bamberg, where I became eventually the assistant manager in the houseware department there. Stayed there for a while, and then lined up with Costco, C-O-S-C-O, housewares, whose products I had purchased over the years, and I became their Northeastern sales representative. From that, went back to the factory in 1952 as sales manager of their office furniture division. And then we built a plant in Gallatin, Tennessee, and I stayed there until I retired in '75, and then we moved to Atlanta to live for the balance of our lives as retirees.
And where do you live now?
I live right near Chastain Park in Atlanta.
Now, as you look back over your service in the military, do you have thoughts for today's generation? Things you might like to say to young people?
Well, of course, all I can say to anybody is, if you're going into the service, make sure it's the Navy.
That's great.
You always have a clean bed to sleep in. You always have 3 meals a day. The weather can't be that bad if you don't get seasick, and the food is good. I just think it's the only place to be. In fact, I wish now, looking back on it, that I'd gone to the Naval Academy and made a career out of it. I had a chance at the end of the war. My next to last commanding officer wanted me to go to a postgraduate course at the Naval Academy, but you had to, in order to apply for that, you had to agree to stay in the Navy, I think, for 10 years. And at that time, I couldn't see committing 10 years for anything.
Yes.
So I didn't put that on my application, and I would not accept it.
Yes. go back for just a minute and talk about your family while you were away in the Pacific in the service. Did your family experience the rationing? Did they plant a victory garden? How did you communicate?
Well, my family had a farm which they used for weekends about 40 miles from where we lived. So they had a nifty a garden there of all kinds of vegetables and everything. And as long as I get the gasoline to go up there, they're okay. My sister, who was my only other relative, and I only had one sister, she got married during the war, and so she moved away as her husband came out of the Air Force. But they got along pretty well with the rationing, and my father figured out several ways to beat the rationing by buying automobile tires in advance and putting them down the cellar, and even had a 50-gallon drum of gasoline in the garage, which I'm surprised didn't explode and blow us off the map. But he was not going to be deprived with the war. But they got along okay.
Would you like to talk a little bit about when you have the veterans reunions? And are you active in any veterans groups right here in Atlanta?
I'm a member of the Navy League, which is a national order that I belong to. I don't participate in any local activities, the American Legion or anything like that, but I do go to the Veterans Administration hospital over on Claremont for my prescription drugs, which is a tremendous saving for veterans. And I wish I'd found out about that earlier, because being 83 years old, I've picked up a lot of prescription over the years, and some of them are pretty expensive. But you can get them, each prescription, I believe, is $7 for a month's supply. And most of the ones I'm getting there cost over $100 for a month's supply. So that's a good saving.
That is good.
But I don't, other than my reunions, and I haven't been able to attend the last 2 reunions because my wife has become ill, and I've been unable to leave her, and she's been unable to go. So I've just sort of had to stand aside while we hope that she'll recover well enough so we can go to the one this year in New England.
I certainly hope so.
Because I enjoy them so much.
Yes.
And we go to interesting places. We went to Annapolis one time, and that was a great reunion. And we've been Pensacola, Florida, and San Diego, and some of them have been interior places like St. Louis and Charleston, South Carolina. And I think it's a wonderful get-together, because when you're in a ship in the Navy, like I was, for so long, you form a community. You're with these people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and enlisted men and officers, you become bonded, in a way that it doesn't take much to renew the bond by getting together, and we enjoy each other's company. And when we get together in a reunion, there's no barrier between officers and men. We're all just sailors getting together for a good time, and so it's well worth getting together just to see your old friends. And they're regular people. They come regularly without fail every year. And I've been very frustrated by not being able to attend the last 2, but hopefully we'll make this one this year.
Definitely hope you'll make the next one.
I do too.
Now, would you please tell me your wife's name?
Joanne.
Good. And any children in the area?
I have a daughter, Sally Ann White, who is a 32-year veteran with Delta. She's a flight attendant. And my son, who spent 20 years in the military, retired from the Navy, is as a doctor, is an oral surgeon, and he has his own clinic in Albany, Georgia.
Very interesting.
So we get together every now and then with them, and of course my daughter lives here because she's based in Atlanta, and she's about ready to retire from Delta once they come up with a reasonable package,
Yes.
which I don't know when that's going to be because their financial situation isn't the best,
Yes.
and they're not about to overcompensate their retirees.
Yes. Well, I know you're thrilled to have them both close by.
Pardon?
I know you're happy to have them both close by.
Yes,
Yes.
that's right. If I had my druthers, I'd live in New England. I love that part of the world. And my daughter would immediately transfer her base to Boston and live where we are in New England and then just commute to Boston to work. My son would not follow us because he married a girl from Puerto Rico who has an illness that requires her to live in a warm climate, so she couldn't put up with that New England winter.
No.
But the chances of our moving to New England are rather, I'd say, slim at this point.
Yes. Well, it may feel a little like New England winter down here recently. It's been so cold.
No,
Now, is there anything else you would like to add? Anything present, past, future?
I can't think of anything. I must say, as you probably have gathered, I'm a real fan of the Navy. I wear a hat all the time because this hat, I'll put it on, just model it for you. This hat was given to me at our Annapolis reunion, and I wear it all the time because it allows me to meet people who are in the Navy in Atlanta. A lot of people, say, "Oh, you were in the Navy. I was too." And we have a naval officers group that meets once a month at the Horseradish Grill for lunch, third Wednesday of every month. And so this is a recruiting tool because I've met some of the people who attend by having my naval hat on. But I dearly love the Navy. I just think the world of it and wish it's too late for me to ever be in the Navy again, but I can still be a loyal supporter of the Navy.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming and for sharing your experiences.
My pleasure.
We're
I hope I didn't ramble along too much.
We're honored that you are here. So
Well,
interesting.
if you need any follow-up or additional detail or anything at all, don't hesitate to call me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.